Hi everyone, my name is Dries Vervoort. I am a digital media artist at Luxion. This session will be the last webinar in the KeyShot 6 Master Series of webinars. And today we'll be focusing on KeyShot 6 feature enhancements. More specifically, we'll be covering enhancements to camera animations and VR. So let's open KeyShot, and I'll start simple with a cube, and I'll add just a camera. So if we go to the scene tree for the cameras, if you right click the camera, then we get an overview of the animations we can apply to the camera, and you will notice that we have added a few more compared to the ones we had in KeyShot 5. So the new animation types we have for cameras are camera path animation. We also have a depth of field animation now, a zoom animation. You may remember the zoom from KeyShot 5, but I will point out that the difference with the one in KeyShot 6, and we have a panorama camera animation. So let's start with the path animation. I will just open a more interesting scene than this one. So I have this diamond ring scene, which has a camera and no animations yet. And we'll kick this off by talking about the path animation. If you right click on the camera in the scene tree and select the path animation type, we are presented with a camera path dialog. What the camera path essentially does is create a range of control points and then creates a path between those control points. So what it allows to do is to make smooth transitions between control points to have a more dynamic motion of your camera. So a good way to know what is going on with the path is to open up the geometry view in KeyShot 6. Please note that the features that are discussed today for animation and VR are available in KeyShot Pro for animation, and VR is an additional add-on for KeyShot HD or Pro. So if I hit the O key, I am presented with the geometry view. As discussed in previous webinars, the geometry view is an extra OpenGL accelerated viewport where you can see the cameras in your scene. So I see this camera named Cam, which is the only camera I have in this scene at the moment. And I will use this view to show and explain the creation and functioning of the camera path. So I currently have one control point in this dialog, which is my initial camera position. If I want to add a new control point, I can simply move my camera in the real-time view. Let me decrease the size of this window and enable performance mode. So I can change my camera in real time, and it also shows in the geometry view. So if I now want to have a new control point at this position, I can hit this add button, and this creates an extra control point. Also in the geometry view, I get a little preview of the connection, the path that is drawn between the first and the second control point. I can keep on changing my camera in real time and keep adding control points. So I now have 4 control points, which are highlighted here in the geometry view. If I'm happy with my control points, I can hit OK, and that creates a path animation in the animation timeline. Let me decrease the length of this animation in the time settings. A good tip, if you want to decrease the duration in whole seconds, you can hit this second section of the duration and then use the scroll wheel to increase or decrease the duration. If I click the path animation, I get the animation properties here on the right side, and we get an overview of the control points in our path, as well as some additional control that I'll discuss in a few moments. As I accepted the path animation, you can see that I now have a smooth curve between my control points. And as I now scrub through my timeline, you can see that I have a path between those control points. You can see this is still a little jerky and not optimal. So that's not a problem because I can still edit those control points. As I click a point in my list, there are different options available. I can add new control points. I can change the order in which control points are evaluated for the path. So for instance, if I change the order, it will make a different interpolation. Let me revert this back like this. I can also select a control point and hit this triad icon, and this allows me to move the control point. So if I hit this button, move position of selected control point, my active camera in real time changes to that control point. And I also get this this move tool in the geometry view, where I can change the position and orientation of the view in that control point. As I make changes in the geometry view, it will also update in real time. Additionally, while you are still editing the control point, you can also change your view in real time and you see the updated position in geometry view. And if you then right click in the geometry view, you have the option to save position. What this does is basically snap the control point to to the view in real time. So let me do this again for control point number 3. So I can either, to edit a control point, either select one here in the camera path list in the timeline and click the move position of selected control point button, or I can click the control point in a geometry view and then right click and select move control point from there. That gives me the same move tool, and I can again use either the move tool to reposition the control point, or I can adjust the view in real time and then save the position. So right click in the geometry view, save position. That snaps the control point to that view, and then accept the move. Also, you have the option to move the control point by the local camera axis or the global scene axis. So by adjusting the control points, you can still edit the created path. Additionally, there is control for tension. Sliding this value allows to sort of relieve the path. So as you notice, if I zoom in, I can adjust the tension in the curve. So it goes either from completely loose to completely tensioned. So a good value would be somewhere right in the middle. Depends a bit on how close your control points are together and the kind of transition you have. Additionally, there is this checkbox for closed path that if you check it, it will basically make a full loop. So it will connect the first and the last control points in your path. So another nice application for path animations is for walkthroughs, and I have a scene for this apartment scene. So this scene took a while to load because interior mode was enabled. Just for performance, I will enable performance mode. Oh, no. I will not enable performance mode. I will switch off interior mode and global illumination. That should make it a little bit faster. Yeah. This is not quite smooth enough, so I will pause this rendering and I will hit the O key to get my geometry view. Like this. And I currently have camera 2 active. And in fact, if I change the view to wireframe or even bounding box, I can see the cameras that I have in this. So my currently active camera is Cam 02, and I created several other cameras. So I have another one here, 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 and here. And what I can do is use these cameras to create a sort of a walkthrough animation. And let me just increase this geometry view. I will put my shading mode back to shaded, and I will change my camera in the geometry view to active camera. So now I'm effectively seeing the same thing as my real-time view, but because the geometry view is OpenGL accelerated, this is a much this view has much better performance. So I have camera 2, camera 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I can use these cameras to create a walkthrough. So I will make sure I have camera 2 active. I will add a path animation to the first camera, and so I have my first control point already, which is the position of this camera where I started the path animation. And to add an extra control point, I can simply double click the camera in the camera list of my scene tab and click Add New Control Point. If I now click OK, let me resize this window. So by clicking OK, I have now one path animation in my scene. If I now scrub the timeline, you can see what happens. It makes a transition between these two cameras. You may wonder why I only selected two cameras, and that's because I want some more control between the different sections of my walkthrough. So I created a camera path animation between these two control points, and now I want to create another one starting from basically camera 3, which is the second control point in my first path. So what I'll need to do in this case is right click on my active camera and create a camera switch event. So I'm switching from camera 2 to camera 3, and here it is. So what this allows me to do is to go to my camera 3 and add a new path animation on this camera. So I create the path, so I create a new path, and as a second control point, I'm going to double click on camera 4, which makes it active, and use it as a new control point. If I now click OK, I have created a second path. So the first path was created with camera 2 and 3 as control points. The second path was created with camera 3 and 4 as control points. So if I now scrub the timeline again, I basically have two connected paths. I could repeat these steps for the rest of the camera, so I could create another switch event on camera 3 in this case, and I could make a switch event to camera 4, and this way I can further develop my walkthrough. By splitting up your walkthrough in different paths, you get a little more control over the speed of each section and the motion easing, because now I can add a different motion easing on each section, or I can increase the length of certain portions. So you get a little more flexibility by splitting things into multiple parts or paths. If I now change my camera to perspective in the geometry view and change the display, you can now see my two paths. And also a preview of the camera as I scrub the timeline. So that's about paths. We still have a few more and new animation types, and I'll explain these again with this ring model. So we're going to create an orbit around this ring. Let me first get rid of this path animation we created before, and I will right click on the camera and I will add an orbit. The orbit is not new, so this creates an orbit. What is new for all camera animations though is that we get, even though this has not been created as a path, we do get a visualization of the actual path that the camera is following for all camera animations. So even though this is not a path animation, just a regular orbit, we do get a representation of that actual path in the geometry view. So we're going to add a few more animations in this. So right click. I can also open the animation wizard, and the new animation types are available here under camera animations as well. So I'm going to use the new zoom animation. We had a zoom in KeyShot 5 as well, but the zoom animation in KeyShot 5 was actually a dolly, and a dolly is not an actual zoom. So what the KeyShot 5 zoom did was basically increase or decrease the distance of your camera from your subject. So as you look at in the geometry view, this is what the zoom in KeyShot 5 was doing, which is basically a dolly. Now with KeyShot 6, Let me finish up this dialog. If I disable the orbit and just have my new zoom animation, you can see that the behavior is quite different. So what is happening here, let me click the zoom animation, is that now I am going from one focal length to another focal length. So I'm going from a lens, in this case, with the setting or a specification of 35 millimeter to a lens of 70 millimeter. And again, the geometry view is a nice way of seeing what is going on in this scene. And I'm going to hide the ground plane, and as I scrub the timeline, you can see the changes both in real time and in my geometry view. So as I go from a wide lens, 35 millimeter, which has a wide field of view, as is shown by this cone, to a narrow lens, a longer focal length, you can see this change in the geometry view. So by going from a wide lens to a narrower lens, I am effectively making a zoom. And this is a proper zoom because my camera position is not changing. So in this case, I'm going to shorten the length of this animation, and I make it 1 second, and I will put the from focal length to 200, and I will dial in 100 for the end. So now I am effectively zooming out. Let's add a inclination here as well. Again, make this match the previous zoom animation and use something like 30 degrees. So say we want to have some depth of field in this shot as well. So I will go to my camera tab, my camera settings. I will enable depth of field. Click to select the point of focus, and I will click somewhere in this face of the diamond. Click done, and I will dial in a lower f-stop to get more of this this blurry effect of the depth of field. So with the depth of field enabled for my camera, as I now scrub the timeline, you will notice that part of my images of my subject is out of focus now. In KeyShot 5, if you enabled depth of field for your camera, you had no control over depth of field whatsoever. However, what we can do now is apply an animation on the depth of field as well. So if I go to my camera and right-click, I can now add a depth of field animation. If I click this one, I get a depth of field animation in my timeline. And if you look at the properties, we have a few fields here. We have a from section and a to section, and what the depth of field animation does is basically interpolate between these two settings. So we have the from focus distance and the from f-stop apply to the beginning of the animation, and the to focus distance and to f-stop apply to the end of the depth of field animation. If we select point of focus for the from section, we can select the point of focus for the beginning. We can click anywhere on the model in real time, and if you click anywhere on the model in real time, yeah, that will update the from focus distance here in the animation settings. Click done if you selected the right point of focus, and then for the end we can select point of focus as well. And if we click this one, my current time will automatically snap to the end of the animation bar. And now I can select a point that I want to be in focus. So I will click somewhere here on this metal band, and now this part is perfectly in focus. Click done to accept, and if I now scrub my timeline, the part that I want to be in focus in the beginning is in focus, and if I go to the end of my animation, now the part that I selected for the end is in focus as well. So it basically interpolates between these two focus points. So this is a nice addition if you're doing like a macro shot and then doing a bunch of other animations where you're changing either your distance or your focal length and changing the distance from your camera to your subject. Then the depth of field animation is going to be a nice addition for more control. Another animation that we have besides the path, depth of field, and zoom animation is the panorama animation. And for this, I will use an interior scene. So here is an interior scene of a design office. And again, for better performance, I will put this into performance mode. And I will this time create a camera that is located somewhere central in this space. So I will create a new camera, and I will again open my geometry view to better see what's going on. I will put the display mode to bounding box and zoom in a little, and use some controls to position my camera roughly where I want it to be. If you're working in interior spaces, I find often that the absolute camera control gives better control over your positioning in a space. So you can actually dial in exact numerical values in X, Y, and Z for the position of your camera. So I will save this new camera, and I will hit the O key to hide my geometry view. If I now go to the Scene tab and right-click on my new camera, I can apply a panorama animation. And if I now scrap the timeline, what is happening now is that the pivot of the animation is the camera itself. And if I open up the geometry view, you can see what's going on. So as I scrub the timeline, you can see that the camera rotates around its own center. If I click the animation, I can change. There is very little control over this animation, so I can basically just assign a span of rotation. If I type in 360 degree, what I'm doing is effectively make a full turn inside this interior. So this is a nice way of visualizing interior spaces in a very simple but quite effective way. Tied to this functionality somehow is an improvement we made to the to KeyShot VR. So let me get rid of this animation. So in KeyShot 6 we can now make VRs of interior spaces as well. So again, VR is an add-on for KeyShot HD or Pro. So it's an additional license. I will enable it here. So this is a new feature for KeyShot 6. If we open the KeyShot VR wizard, we can select the type of VR as we always have had. So we can choose a turntable, which is a simple horizontal rotation, spherical, hemispherical, tumble. In this case, I will choose hemispherical. And what is new now is that we can select panoramic camera as the VR rotation center. If you select panoramic camera for interiors, then please also make sure that you enable the horizontal environment rotation for best results. If you then click next, I get this KeyShot VR preview, and if I now drag in my real-time view, I will get feedback of how the actual VR would react. So you can see now that I'm pivoting around the camera itself, and I can basically look around in this interior scene. So if I make a VR with the panoramic camera as a pivot point, I can actually visualize interior spaces in an interactive fashion. There are a few other enhancements to KeyShot VR as well. We have a new feature is preserved image quality, and I have rendered out a sample VR right here. So this is a 800 by 800 pixel sized VR. And previously it was the case that if you zoomed in on a VR, you would lose image quality. But now, if I zoom in on this VR, you will notice that I don't lose any image quality. So the way you configure this is while setting up the VR in KeyShot. So I have the scene that I used for that VR. Let's enable the camera that I used to create the VR. Open the VR wizard. And now I will go into the render options after setup. And in the KeyShot VR render options, we under advanced, we now have this option to preserve image quality. So it only applies if you have zoom in enabled. So if you enable zoom in, then you can enter a percentage, and if you then toggle preserve image quality, the quality will be preserved no matter how much you zoom in. Please mind, however, that this setting will increase the render resolution of your final VR. So if you have a zoom in percentage of 200 and you specify your VR resolution, for instance, as 1000 by 1000, then the actual rendering of each VR frame will be 2000 by 2000. So be mindful that increasing this percentage value will increase the resolution, and so will also increase the render time and the file size of your final VR. So be careful when picking the percentage and resolution settings for your VR. Another small improvement for KeyShot VR is that it is now by default responsive to the browser width. So if I open up this one again, so this VR, now by default, as I scale the browser window, it will resize to fit the browser width. So those are the improvements we have to VR and camera animations. I think that summarizes today's session. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
I think we're good. There's no questions.
Okay. So yeah, this was the last session of the KeyShot Master Series. I hope it was helpful to all of you. We will be back soon with some with more specialized sessions about specific workflows. Also, this webinar will be available as a recording on YouTube. Okay, thanks for watching and see you again.